Prior to beginning the activity, please be sure to review the faculty information and disclosure statements, as well as the learning objectives. After listening to the activity, complete the post-test by clicking the Earn Credit link in the episode description. Downloadable slides and resources are also available. The following presentation is copyrighted by Medscape. No use, broadcast, or recording of this presentation or any part thereof is permitted without the written authorization of Medscape.
The following presentation is part of a certified educational activity provided by Medscape Education and supported by an independent educational grant from Sandoz.
Hello, Philip. It's good to see you again. How are you doing today?
Hello, Dr. Flores. Thank you. It's good to see you again too. I've been doing well lately. Thank you.
That's good to hear, Philip. Have you been noticing any new symptoms or have things been the same lately?
No, nothing new.
That's good. Now, looking at your test results, your recent MRI doesn't show any new lesions, and your EDSS score and the other tests we did are basically the same as last time.
Yes, good. Nothing new there either.
And it looks like you still have no signs of JC virus in your blood.
Okay, that's good.
Is there anything you wanted to discuss with me today?
Actually, there is. I'm a member of an online support group for people with RRMS, and a few of my friends from the group have mentioned that they've started taking a treatment called a biosimilar? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I'm glad you mentioned it because it is something I wanted to talk to you about as well.
Oh, really? Do you think a biosimilar treatment is something I should be considering? I was talking a bit about it with the infusion nurse, but he also said it would be good to discuss with you too.
Yes, I definitely think you could consider it. First of all, do you know what a biosimilar is?
Not really, to be honest.
Well, let's start there then. A biosimilar is a biologic medicine, like the medicine you're taking now. Like the name implies, a biosimilar is highly similar, but not identical to its originator biologic medication, also called the reference product. What this means is that there are no clinically meaningful differences between biosimilars and reference products. Are you with me so far?
Yes, I think so. So a biosimilar is like a generic medication?
Not quite. Generic medicines are exact copies of medicines that are no longer patented. These are usually small molecule medicines that are easy to replicate, like aspirin. Biologic medicines are more difficult to copy exactly because they are larger, complex molecules made from living cells or microorganisms, which requires a more complex manufacturing process. However, biosimilars undergo rigorous testing to ensure that they provide the same treatment benefits for patients without causing any new or worsening side effects.
Ah, okay. I see. Is the use of biosimilars relatively new? I don't remember hearing about them when I was first diagnosed.
Well, the first biosimilars were approved in Europe in 2006, and since then, many more have been approved. Biosimilars can be used to treat several conditions, including chronic skin and bowel diseases, diabetes, some eye conditions, and even cancer. And indeed, there is one available for treating MS too. This was just approved recently, which may be why you're just hearing about it now. It is the only approved one in Europe, but as research progresses, we might also have other options to consider in the future.
I understand. So you think I should consider switching to a biosimilar treatment?
It might be a good idea. Let's discuss this a little more before making any decisions, okay?
Okay.
Hello, I'm Wallace Brownlee. I'm a consultant neurologist and the clinical lead for the Multiple Sclerosis Service at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery here in London in the United Kingdom. Now, we've just seen Philip, a patient who's heard about biosimilars from his MS support group, and biosimilars are now becoming available, and clinicians are going to need to be able to answer questions like the ones that Philip's brought up at his consultation today, and indeed to be able to initiate conversations about biosimilars themselves. Biosimilars are highly similar, but not the same as the reference medicine, which is because these are biological medications. Importantly, a biosimilar doesn't have any clinically meaningful differences compared with the reference medication, so we anticipate similar safety, efficacy, and tolerability as other biological medications. Now, there are important differences between biosimilars and originator medicines in terms of their regulatory approach to approval. So the conventional approval pathway for an originator drug begins with analytical studies, and then generally quite a large clinical development program involving phase 2 and phase 3 studies to establish firstly safety and then efficacy. In contrast, for biosimilars, there's a much larger analytical phase to try and show biosimilarity between the biosimilar and the originator, and a much smaller clinical phase here at the top. We now have natalizumab biosimilar approved here in Europe for patients with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, and this has gone through these various phases of development from an analytical phase to preclinical studies, PK and PD studies, and then finally the phase 3 clinical trial, which is now published. Now, in that trial, it was shown that compared with the match group taking the reference natalizumab product, that efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity were similar for the biosimilar medication. The clinical trial did include a subgroup of patients who switched over from reference natalizumab to biosimilar natalizumab, and there weren't any significant differences in the treatment group in terms of safety, tolerability, or immunogenicity. Now, here in Europe, there's considerable experience with the use of biosimilars outside of the field of neurology. And within neurology, some of us do also have experience with the use of rituximab biosimilar, for example, in conditions like myasthenia gravis. And indeed, here in the UK, our National Health Service recommends that if you are going to use rituximab to treat myasthenia, that the lowest acquisition costs for the rituximab biologic should be used, and in most settings that's going to be with a biosimilar drug. Now, we have relatively little experience of biosimilars to date in multiple sclerosis specifically, but rituximab, again, in some countries is used off-label for the treatment of multiple sclerosis, and there is some data published with the use of reference rituximab and biosimilar rituximab in an MS population. And the pharmacodynamic effects of the reference and biosimilar rituximab were similar in terms of CD19 count, and over a 1-year period, there weren't any differences in disease activity. Adverse events were similar. In countries outside Europe, there are biosimilar preparations of beta interferon that are used, for example, in Mexico, Argentina, Iran. These healthcare systems have a different approach to approval and a different regulatory framework for biosimilars, and these medications aren't approved in Europe at this time. So what about the benefits of biosimilars? Well, these really relate to the cost, which is generally lower than reference products, and this is extremely important because of the impact of rising healthcare costs, not just on wider society and payers and insurers, but also on individual patients. And the real promise of biosimilars is the ability to offer medications at a lower cost and potentially expand access to treatment. Now, as neurologists, we need to know how to discuss switching and use of biosimilar medications with patients. So let's return to Philip's visit with his neurologist and find out what happens next.
So if I understand correctly, a biosimilar is almost identical to the treatment I'm on now and should be as effective. Would the side effects be any different?
They should not. A biosimilar treatment should have the same potential treatment benefits and side effects as the reference product. The biosimilar for MS is also given as an infusion with the same dose and dosing schedule as the reference product you are on now.
But I've never been on a biosimilar medication before. Would that make a difference?
Good question, Philip. Biosimilars can be used in patients who have previously been treated with the reference product, like yourself, or in patients who have not yet received any type of treatment.
And are biosimilars approved the same way other medications are approved, with clinical trial testing?
Not to the same extent. Studies are performed to compare the structures and function of the biosimilar to the reference product, and comparative clinical studies in humans are done if necessary, after which the biosimilar will be reviewed by the regulatory authorities.
But why is the testing process different for biosimilars? I thought they would have to be tested like any other medicine.
And they are, just differently. This is because the safety and effectiveness of the reference product has already been extensively studied. Therefore, if the biosimilar is very similar in structure and has the same biological activity as the reference product, not all of the clinical studies need to be repeated. The aim of the studies with biosimilars is to show that there are no clinically meaningful differences between it and the reference product.
I see. So if I were to switch to the biosimilar, it should be just as effective as the treatment I'm on now, because it is highly similar to the treatment I'm on now.
Yes, that's correct.
But I'm doing just fine with my current treatment. I'm not so sure I'd want to switch to something else.
I completely understand, Philip. Actually, the fact that you are doing well on your current treatment makes you a good candidate for a biosimilar. What also may make this an interesting option for you is that biosimilars are more affordable for those without coverage and for the healthcare system as well. In other disease areas like rheumatology, the availability of biosimilars has also expanded patient access to effective treatments.
Well, that is something to consider indeed. Have there been studies done in people who have switched to biosimilars?
Indeed, there are several. And they show that switching from a reference product to a biosimilar is safe and effective.
That's good to know. I have a few more questions, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Some patients like Philip who are doing well on a reference product may be less inclined to want to change to a biosimilar medication, but as was pointed out, those patients who are doing well on their treatment are particularly good candidates. And we do have data from other therapeutic areas about what happens with switching. So the NOR-switch study was a large study looking at switching between originator and biosimilar infliximab. This was a government-funded study in the Nordic countries. And a switch to biosimilar infliximab was not inferior to continuing with an originator medication. And the incidence, for example, of anti-drug antibodies, adverse events, and fusion reactions was similar. And during an extension study of the NOR-switch study out to 52 weeks, and then 78 weeks, there weren't any differences between those who went on to biosimilar. And I think this really does give us confidence for switching between the reference and biosimilar medications. And in Europe, the EMA recommend that once a biosimilar is approved, that it should be considered to be interchangeable. So as such, a biosimilar can be used instead of a reference product and vice versa, or one biosimilar can be replaced with another. However, implementation via switching or substitution is managed by individual countries. Now, a couple of years ago, a group of us got together to try and develop some recommendations on the use of so-called follow-on disease-modifying therapies in MS, and that includes biosimilar medicines and also complex non-biological drugs like glutathione acetate, for example. And really, our key recommendations were that it's important that the approval process for biosimilars, that rigorous analytical, biofunctional, clinical data are used to show biosimilarity. And in the European Union, it's very clear on how this is done. And in highly regulated areas like the EU, it's intended that biosimilars are used in the same way as the reference product. We also made some recommendations regarding switching and switching between reference and biosimilar medications is appropriate, particularly when the medicine's been approved in a highly regulated area like the EU. Now let's return back to our case and see what other questions Philip has for us about biosimilars.
So let's say I switch to the biosimilar treatment and I start having more or different side effects. Would I be able to switch back to the other treatment, the one I'm taking now?
Yes. Though I don't expect you would experience any new side effects, it's always an option to switch back to the reference medication.
And a biosimilar treatment is just as good as the original treatment and not a cheap version that will work less well with more side effects.
Yes, the biosimilar treatment should work just as well as the reference biologic and is indeed just as safe too.
And who can I speak to if I have any other questions about biosimilars?
You can always ask me any questions you may have, or you could also ask your infusion nurse, who will also know a lot about biosimilar therapies. I also have some pamphlets and a patient handout I can share with you, and I know some trustworthy websites with very useful information. The European Medicines Agency website, in particular, has a lot of excellent information about biosimilars that could be helpful for you.
Okay, that's good. And I shouldn't notice any differences at all if I start taking the biosimilar medicine, right?
That's correct. But if you decide to switch to the biosimilar and you start to experience some side effects, I would like you to call and tell us right away, okay?
Okay. Would we still keep having our regular follow-up appointments with this new medication?
Of course. We will continue our follow-up appointments as usual, and should you have any new developments, we will address these as quickly as possible.
All right. Is it okay if I read over the materials you're giving me and I confirm later this week with you or the nurse? My friends in the support group who have switched all say that they're satisfied with biosimilar therapy, but just want to make a well-informed decision.
Yes, of course, Philip, that's fine. We could even have the nurse follow up with you, or you can ask me any questions you may have. It's important for you to fully understand how the medications are essentially the same, and that you're comfortable with your decision, should you choose to switch to the biosimilar.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Flores.
Now, we've seen the conversation between Philip and his neurologist, and it's important for him to be involved in the decision-making and to fully understand what biosimilars are. And the information that's conveyed should reassure him that the side effects and the efficacy shouldn't be any different from a reference medication. But an issue that we face in the context of making these changes and having discussions with patients is the so-called nocebo effect, which is when patients have the view that they may experience more side effects or more problems with a biosimilar medication. So in terms of framing this discussion, I think it's really important to avoid negative instructions and negative expectations, framing the information in a positive way and encouraging the decision-making to be shared between the healthcare provider and the patient. And a number of real-world studies show us that patient education and support can increase acceptance and of biosimilars and reduce the nocebo effects. That might include proactive discussions with patients face-to-face, providing written information for patients to take away, providing a helpline or a number where patients can get in touch, for example, with a nurse specialist, and of course, scheduling regular clinical reviews. And it's important because the words and the gestures that we use can definitely influence patient perception. And nocebo effect is important because it can influence adherence to medication. It can lead to wasted medication, for example, if it's a subcutaneous self-injection at home, patients may not use their medication. There's also increased financial burden if patients experience suboptimal treatment response or relapse if they're not adherent to their therapy. And there might be the need for other medications, for example, to manage side effects leading to polypharmacy and higher treatment costs. And of course, then there are issues related to treatment discontinuation. So some of the tips for minimizing nocebo effects and improving our communication to clearly explain biosimilars and how they're improved and how they're similar and different to originator medications. To talk through the many years of experience that we have here in Europe with biosimilars, to share data on switching to biosimilars in other disease areas, for example, the North Switch study, and to be upfront about the potential benefits to the wider healthcare system and individual patients that biosimilars have to offer. So in conclusion, I think it's important for clinicians to have a good understanding of biosimilars, what they are, how they're approved by regulatory agencies, and to feel confident in discussing these with our patients, because these are likely to become an increasing part of our practice moving forward. I just wanted to say thank you for participating in this activity. Please do continue on to answer the questions that follow and complete the evaluation. Thank you for your attention.